we're separate today.
Right, so, you know what they say about all good plans go to waste? Yesterday was their 50th wedding anniversary. We had a nice bottle of bubbly to give them yesterday morning, but then Model A decided it was thirstier than they were and buggered its head gasket at Woodville. So they didn't make it yesterday morning, and neither did the bag that the wine was in. So the only bag I had left at 9 o'clock last night was the Superman bag. The Model A's still going. You must have been the Superman. Right. This morning, you've got approximately 12 miles on Highway 54. I couldn't really make it any shorter. So please, there will be a little bit of traffic on that road coming from behind you. It is an undulating bit of road. There is a couple of steep hills. Please be aware of modern vehicles trying to get past you. Okay, thank you for coming again. We lost a few yesterday, so hopefully the backup crew have a quiet day. And we'll hopefully see most of you, if not all of you, for a drink back at the Civic Centre around 4 o'clockish. You should be in town, back here in town by 3. I'll be up at the Civic Centre by 4 with it open if you want to, even if you're not staying for dinner, to come and have a couple of drinks and tell some lies before you go off and do your own thing. But anyway, thank you very much. That's it. bridge, if we'd gone right immediate right there, we'd come out here. And it's only about 2 minutes down the road.
Yes, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you a toast. The haggis. Fair for your honest sonsy face. Great chieftain of the pudding race. Abune them all you take your place. Penge tripe or theorem. And will ye will they all grace as long as we hear 'em. Your groaning trench are there you fill. Your hurdies like a distant hill. Your pin would help to mend the mill in time of need. While through your pores the dews distill like amber bead. He's knife, see rustic ribbers dick, and cut ye up ready slicked, trenching your gushing entrails brick like only ditch, and then, oh what a glorious sight, warm, reeking, rich, and horn for horn they stretch and strive, deal take highmost on thy drive, all the wheels white kites be live are bent like drums, and all good men who slight to arrive be thank at him. Is there that Irish French ragout, or all that would sta a sou, or fricassee would make a spew with perfect scunner, look down with sneer and scornful view on sick a dinner. Poor devil, see him Irish trash, as feckless as a withered rash, his kimbled shank, a big white lash, his knave in it, through bloody flood or field to dash, oh how unfit. For Mark the rustic, haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread, clapping his woolly naver blade, he'll back at whistle, and legs and arms and heads both dead, like taps of thistle. Ye powers will make man mind your care, and distribute your bill of fare. Old Scotland wants nae skinkling ware at jops and laggies, but if you wish her grateful prayer, ye her a haggis. Thank you. Cheers. Cheers.
Competitors
because at the time I was actually pooping myself about the car that he said he was going to bring, and I was going to have a four-wheel drive shadowing around the whole event. So when Chris Lawrence messaged me to say he wasn't bringing the 13T, it was one heck of a relief. But then I followed him for about half an hour or so, a couple of times on Saturday, and realised the T Speedster that's about half a foot off the ground, going down gravel roads with a big boom in the middle, probably also wasn't the easiest choice. So would Chris Lawrence like to come forward, please?
So the yellow tea came from a gentleman by the name of Ashley Smith over in Taranaki, and a friend of mine at Karaka brought it. So it lives at my place because he still hasn't told his wife that he brought it. So I said to Hugh, would you mind if I took it on the Highland Fling? And he goes, go for your life. So Leon and I have been working on it to get it back to roadworthy standard, and which didn't take a lot because it hadn't been registered on the road since 1980. So it's done extremely well. I'm really pleased with it for a Model T that Ashley Smith built, and he's sold all his cars now. So yeah, all credit to a fantastic engineer who built a car out of nothing. So I thank everybody. It was a great weekend and I really appreciate it. Thanks, Derek.
This is Highland Fling Hard Luck Trophy. Now, holy smoke, a lot of people were vying for this. A couple of them never even made the start. There's a few cars arrived back on trailers, and I think some of it should be pushed into the bush and burned. But there's one particular car that broke down twice from someone that is very deserving of this. First he got a flat tyre, and then his car lunched itself. And this is the same man that gives me a very hard time about driving Chevrolets all the time. So would Cliff Bennett like to come to the front, please?
Thanks, Bob. There you go.
It's all right, Derek. There's a Chev out there. I'll put in it.
I know where you live.
Yeah, well, I don't know why, but I dumped all the oil out of my sump, and it's run a bearing, and I still don't know where it went through, but I've got a few ideas being told. No, the sump plug's there, and I have put... But we won't talk about, because there's a shed full of cars, but last night we were running a discussion on what we'd use today, so I thought, oh, we'll bring the ute. My wife piped up, why don't you take your Land Cruiser? It hasn't been out for 5 months.
For those that don't know me, I'm Glenn Clements, an North Island Club captain, also a very proud Manawatu Branch member. This is our second run for this event. Of course, it's 4 years running now. We kicked off with AJ and Karen doing the first one in Taiapi, and then COVID stuff the next, and they did the second, and Derek was involved in that with the Gymkhana, and he has the bug for this old car stuff, this gravel road vintage stuff, so he put his hand up for Manawatu, which he didn't really. He put his hand up for him and Bex, because he doesn't delegate, and they've done it, and I really want you to put your hands together for that. Thanks. But before I finish, as I say, these flings have got hold, and it is great, and it's thanks to Karen Smiley and AJ over here. So AJ, come up.
This is not going to be long, and I'm not going to bore you, but I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Karen's. And when we had a quick chat before we came down, she said, I want you to say a few words, Alistair. And you'll have noticed that everyone here has been hearing Derek thanking all of the crews who helped him do this. It needs someone with the vision that Derek had to carry on after what we started off, and I'm happily admitting here tonight that I think he's lifted the bar much, much higher than what we set up at Tai Happy. So on behalf of you all, a big thank you, Derek, and I'm going to ask you all to be upstanding and sing for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. Would you all stand, please? Are you ready? For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, and so say all of us, and so say all of us, and so say all of us, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow.